I found out my wife was living a second life because she forgot her smartwatch at home. If she hadn't left it charging on the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, I'd probably still be married and still believing every lie she told me for the past 2 years. Instead, while I was making coffee, the screen lit up with a message: "Last night was amazing. We need to tell him soon. I can't keep pretending anymore." The message wasn't from the coworker I'd been suspicious of for months. It was from my younger brother. I'm 33M. My wife Emily is 31F. We'd been together for 11 years and married for 7. We met in college, survived long distance, job losses, financial struggles, and even my father's death. I genuinely believed she was my soulmate. We were the couple everyone secretly hated because we looked so happy all the time. Friday takeout nights, Sunday hikes, dumb inside jokes, spontaneous road trips. I thought we'd be together forever. My brother Jake is 29. Growing up, we were close. We weren't best friends, but we always had each other's backs. Emily and Jake got along well too. Looking back, way too well. The first red flags appeared about 2 years ago. Emily suddenly started working late several nights a week. She had recently been promoted, so I didn't question it. Then came weekend brunches, team retreats, girls' nights, emergency meetings. At the same time, she became insanely protective of her phone. It never left her hand. The password changed. It was always face down. Whenever I asked about it, she'd make me feel crazy. "Ryan, you're being paranoid. Can I not have privacy? I can't believe you don't trust me." Eventually, I stopped asking because I honestly thought I was becoming controlling. Then Jake moved back to town after his breakup. And that's when everything started falling apart. Jake moved back to our city 18 months ago after his fiancée left him. He called me one night drunk and crying. He'd lost his apartment and most of his savings. I picked him up and brought him home. Emily hugged him and immediately said, "He stays as long as he needs." I remember thinking I'd married the kindest woman on earth. Those few weeks turned into almost 4 months. At first, it was great. We'd watch football, order takeout, drink beer on the patio, and talk until midnight. Emily fit perfectly into those evenings. Friends joked that the 3 of us looked like a sitcom family. Looking back, the warning signs were everywhere. One Saturday, we were at a friend's barbecue. I walked into the kitchen for drinks and found Emily and Jake standing unusually close. They jumped apart the second they saw me. Emily laughed nervously. "Your brother was telling embarrassing stories about college." Jake wouldn't meet my eyes. I ignored the weird feeling in my stomach. A few weeks later, a client canceled a meeting, so I came home early. I expected an empty house. Instead, I found Emily and Jake on the back patio sharing wine. Both looked startled. "Didn't know you'd be home," Emily said quickly. Meeting got canceled. The conversation died instantly. Jake left 20 minutes later. After he moved into his own apartment, things got stranger. Emily texted him constantly. He stopped by several times a week, often while I was at work. When I joked that she talked to my brother more than I did, she smiled and said, "Someone has to keep him from making terrible decisions." Then, one night around midnight, I woke up and realized Emily wasn't in bed. I found her downstairs whispering on the phone. The second she saw me, she hung up. "Who was that?" I asked. "Sarah," she said instantly. "She's having relationship problems." I believed her. 3 weeks later, I learned Sarah had been vacationing in Mexico that entire week. Still, I told myself I was just paranoid back then. I wish I'd trusted my instincts. Instead, I doubled down on believing my wife. A month after the phone call incident, Emily started mentioning a coworker named Mark constantly. According to her, Mark was incompetent, annoying, and somehow responsible for every late night at the office. Mark screwed up the presentation again. Mark forgot to send the files. Mark kept everyone there until 10. I never met Mark, but I hated the guy. Then Emily began coming home wearing perfume she never used around me. She joined a gym even though she'd always hated working out. She started buying new clothes, expensive ones, and suddenly cared a lot about looking perfect before leaving the house. When I asked if everything was okay, she rolled her eyes. Ryan, women are allowed to improve themselves. Again, I felt guilty. The real gaslighting started after that. If I asked where she'd been, she'd accuse me of tracking her. If I said she seemed distant, she'd claim I was imagining things. One night I finally snapped. "I feel like you're avoiding me," I said. Emily stared at me for several seconds before laughing. "You're seriously insecure lately. Maybe you should talk to someone." That hurt more than I expected. I started wondering if she was right. Maybe I was depressed. Maybe losing Dad years earlier had messed me up more than I realized. So I apologized. She accepted immediately. A week later, Jake invited me out for drinks. Halfway through the night, he asked, "Everything okay between you and Emily?" I remember being surprised. "Why? You just seem stressed." I shrugged. "Work stuff." He nodded, but something about his expression bothered me. It looked like pity. I should have asked questions. Instead, I changed the subject. 2 days later, while Emily was showering, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message preview. I only saw 6 words before the notification disappeared. "Miss you already. Last night." My blood ran cold. Everything shifted. I stared at that notification for a solid 10 seconds. My first instinct was to grab the phone and unlock it. My second was to pretend I'd never seen it. Instead, I just stood there frozen while the shower ran upstairs. When Emily came down, I asked as casually as possible, "Who's texting you this early?" She glanced at her phone and shrugged. "Work." I almost mentioned the message. Almost. But something stopped me. If she was cheating and I confronted her without proof, she'd deny everything. She always did. So, for the first time in our marriage, I decided to keep my mouth shut. That weekend, Emily told me she had an overnight team retreat at a hotel outside the city. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned it. This time, I checked the company's social media pages. Nothing. No retreat. No event. No photos. I texted Jake, mostly out of habit, asking if he wanted to watch the game Sunday. No response. 3 hours later, he finally replied, "Sorry, busy this weekend." That was unusual. Jake never ignored football. Saturday night, Emily left around 5. She kissed me goodbye, told me she loved me, and drove away smiling. At 8, I made the worst and best decision of my life. I opened our phone account online. I'd never checked it before. I honestly don't know what possessed me. The call logs loaded. One number appeared hundreds of times over the previous 6 months. Calls late at night. During lunch breaks. Early mornings. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. My hands were shaking as I copied it into Google. I expected Mark. I expected some stranger. Instead, Jake's full name appeared on the screen. I actually laughed. A horrible, disbelieving laugh. It was impossible. There had to be some explanation. I called Jake immediately. Straight to voicemail. Then I called Emily. Also voicemail. At 11:43 p.m., I got into my car. I wasn't planning on following anyone. I just needed answers. I ended up parked outside the Lakeside Grand Hotel, staring at my brother's truck. I sat in my car across from the hotel for nearly 20 minutes, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Jake was meeting friends. Maybe Emily's company had actually booked the hotel and he'd come by coincidence. Deep down, though, I already knew. Jake's truck was parked near the side entrance. Emily's car was 3 spaces away. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. At some point, anger took over. I walked into the lobby and asked the receptionist if Emily Carter was staying there. The woman smiled politely and said she couldn't give out guest information. Then fate intervened. The elevator doors opened. Emily stepped out laughing. Jake was right beside her. They were holding hands. For a second, nobody moved. Emily saw me first. The color drained from her face instantly. "Ryan," she whispered. Jake looked like he'd seen a ghost. I wish I could say I handled it calmly. I didn't. I started shouting. Loudly. People in the lobby turned to stare. "How long?" was the only thing I remember screaming. Emily burst into tears immediately. Jake kept saying, "Please, let us explain." That sentence broke something inside me. Explain what? Explain why my wife and my own brother were checking into hotels together. I looked at Emily and asked, "Did you ever love me at all?" She started sobbing harder but couldn't answer. That silence told me everything. I walked out before either of them could say another word. I drove around for hours. At around 3 in the morning, Jake called me 17 times. Emily called 23. I ignored every single call. When I finally got home, I found something waiting on the kitchen counter. Emily had left her smartwatch behind. The message preview read, "Last night was amazing. We need to tell him soon. I cannot keep pretending anymore." At 8:17 the next morning, the screen lit up with a new message from Jake. And what it said made the betrayal even worse, not even close. Far worse. At 8:17 a.m., Jake's new message appeared on the watch screen. "She told me about the test. We can't hide this anymore." I read it 3 times before the meaning hit me. Test. What test? My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the watch. Emily came downstairs a few minutes later, still wearing yesterday's clothes. The second she saw me sitting at the kitchen table with the watch in front of me, she froze. "We need to talk," she whispered. "No," I said. "You need to talk." For the next hour, my entire life collapsed. The affair had started almost a year earlier. According to Emily, it just happened. They'd grown close while Jake was staying with us. One night, after drinking too much, they kissed. Instead of ending it, they kept going. I felt sick listening to her. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 weeks earlier, Emily had discovered she was pregnant. She didn't know who the father was. I honestly thought I was going to pass out. We had spent years trying for a baby. Years. Doctor appointments, fertility tests, disappointment after disappointment. Emily had cried in my arms more times than I could count because she thought she could never get pregnant. And now she was standing in our kitchen telling me she was pregnant and wasn't sure whether the child belonged to me or my brother. I asked Jake to come over. When he arrived, he looked terrified. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I punched him. Hard. He didn't fight back. Instead, he said something that stunned me. "Ryan, I never wanted to hurt you. But there's something you don't know." I laughed bitterly. What else could there possibly be? Jake looked at Emily. Emily started crying again. Then she said the one sentence I never expected to hear. "Ryan, the baby isn't the secret." Emily whispered, "The reason we stayed together all these years was built on a lie your parents told us before your father died." I suddenly couldn't breathe. At all. And suddenly, everyone looked guilty. Even me. Ryan, the baby isn't the secret, Emily repeated. Please just let us explain before you walk away. I wanted to leave. I wanted to throw both of them out of my house and never see either of them again. But my father's name stopped me cold. Jake sat down, looking physically sick. 3 months before Dad died, he told Mom something he'd kept hidden for 30 years. I stared at him. What the hell are you talking about? Emily wiped her eyes. Your dad wasn't your biological father. For a second, I honestly thought this was some twisted attempt to justify the affair. Shut up, I said. I'm serious, Jake whispered. Mom told us after the funeral. I looked from one of them to the other. Us? Neither answered. That silence was enough. Apparently, 6 years ago, after Dad's diagnosis, our parents decided to tell Jake the truth in case Dad passed away. Mom planned to tell me later, but Dad died sooner than expected, and she never did. According to Mom, she'd had a brief affair before I was born. Dad chose to stay and raise me as his own. Nobody outside the family knew. Nobody except Jake. Emily found out the night Dad died. I felt like the room was spinning. You both knew. For 6 years. Emily nodded through tears. Why didn't anyone tell me? Your mother begged us not to, Jake said quietly. She was terrified you'd hate her. I laughed. A horrible, broken sound. So instead you two started sleeping together. Jake covered his face. It didn't start because of that. But once it happened, we convinced ourselves it wasn't technically wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife and my brother had spent a year justifying their affair because we weren't biologically related. Then Jake said, Ryan, there's something else. Mom didn't just know about us. I looked up. She encouraged us to tell you after the DNA test came back. I asked, DNA test? Emily nodded. The baby results arrived yesterday. That's why we were at the hotel. I felt truly sick. Why? I felt truly sick. Why would Mom encourage this? I asked. Emily looked away. Jake answered. Because she thought if the baby was mine, you deserved to know everything at once. I laughed again. By then, laughter was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. So Mom knew you were sleeping with my wife for a year and said nothing? Jake nodded. I left the house without another word. I drove straight to my mother's place. She opened the door, saw my face, and immediately started crying. That told me all I needed to know. How long? I asked. Ryan. How long did you know? She sat down and admitted everything. She'd discovered the affair 8 months earlier after seeing messages on Jake's phone. She confronted them. Emily confessed. Mom panicked. She'd already spent decades hiding one devastating secret from me and couldn't bear losing another son. So she kept quiet. Worse, she convinced herself that because Jake and I weren't biologically related, maybe their relationship wasn't as terrible as it seemed. I couldn't even process what I was hearing. You're my mother, I whispered. You were supposed to protect me. She broke down sobbing. I walked out. That evening, Emily called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Please come home, she said. There's still something you don't know. I'm done with secrets. No, she said quietly. You really aren't. I returned only because I wanted closure. Emily and Jake were waiting at the kitchen table. Between them sat a folder. Inside was the paternity test. Jake wasn't the father. I was. For one brief, stupid second, hope exploded inside me. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe my child deserved that. Then Emily slid another document across the table. It was a DNA ancestry report. My eyes stopped on one sentence. Probability of sibling relationship between Ryan and Jacob, 99.98%. I looked up, confused. Jake whispered, "Mom lied. Dad was my biological father too. She only learned the truth last week." I froze. Ryan. Dad was my biological father too. Mom only found out last week after taking a DNA test herself. For several seconds, nobody spoke. My brain simply refused to process the information. Emily and Jake had spent an entire year convincing themselves that their affair wasn't incest because Mom believed I had a different father. The one fact they'd used to justify betraying me turned out to be a lie. Jake started crying. The moment we got the ancestry results, we ended it. "That's why we wanted to tell you." I stared at him. "You ended it because you're related. Not because I'm your brother." Neither of them answered. That silence hurt more than the affair. I packed a bag that night and left. Over the following weeks, Emily called constantly. Sometimes she begged. Sometimes she blamed me, saying we'd grown apart long before the affair. Other times she insisted we should try counseling for the baby's sake. I filed for divorce instead. Jake moved across the country. Mom kept texting apologies that I never answered. For months, I barely functioned. I lost 20 pounds. I couldn't sleep. Every memory from the previous decade felt poisoned. Family photos, holidays, birthdays, all of it suddenly looked fake. Then, 3 months later, Emily showed up at my apartment unexpectedly. She looked exhausted. "I know you hate me," she said, "but you deserve to know something." I almost closed the door. Then she handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter written by my father 2 weeks before he died. And after reading the first paragraph, I sat down on the floor and cried. The letter explained everything. Dad had always suspected Mom's old affair hadn't produced a child. Years earlier, he'd secretly taken a DNA test with both of us and learned that Jake and I were full brothers. He never told anyone because he didn't want to destroy the family. In the final lines he wrote, "If you're reading this, remember that betrayal does not have to become your identity." I read it twice to know. I read Dad's letter at least 20 times over the next few days. Every sentence felt like he was reaching across time, trying to stop me from drowning in anger. The final line haunted me, "You cannot control what people do to you. You can only control what you become afterward." For months, I wanted revenge. I imagined exposing Emily publicly, cutting Jake out forever, and telling every relative exactly what they'd done. Some family members already knew pieces of the story. Most were horrified. A few actually defended them, saying people make mistakes and that love is complicated. I stopped speaking to those people immediately. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Emily didn't fight it. During the hearing, she quietly said, "I'm sorry for destroying our life." I looked at her and realized I felt nothing. Not love. Not rage. Just exhaustion. Our daughter was born 3 months later. Yes, daughter. The DNA test confirmed she was mine. I spent weeks debating whether I even wanted to be involved. I hated myself for thinking that, but every memory of Emily was tied to betrayal. Then I held my daughter for the first time. Everything changed. She wrapped her tiny hand around my finger, opened her eyes, and instantly shattered every wall I'd built around myself. None of this was her fault. She hadn't asked to be born into lies, secrets, and broken relationships. In that moment, I knew I would never abandon her. Today, she's almost 2 years old. Jake has never met her. I haven't spoken to him since the night I left the house. Mom and I have slowly started rebuilding our relationship through therapy, although things will never fully heal. Emily and I peacefully co-parent, but that's all we'll ever be. People often ask whether I forgive them. Honestly, I still don't know. What I do know is this: their betrayal became part of my story. It did not become my identity. And every time my daughter laughs, I remember that life kept moving forward. Dad would have loved her.